Okay, so today I'm having another kind of like seized by the moment inspiration to do a live. I'm actually currently preparing for the first, kind of for the launch of this year's batch of clients who are going through my signature program, which is called Clarity. And what Clarity is really about is, so what Clarity is about is meant to be a good beginning to help people have a more solid foundation to begin to discern their personal vocation. Okay, ultimately is to help give them greater clarity. That's why it's called Clarity, about how to go about discerning their personal vocation. But even then, I always tell interested clients that Clarity is really just a beginning. In fact, it's not even as much of a beginning as I would like it to be, but most people have no idea just how much is involved in this long process of discerning personal vocation. And that's why so many people are very frustrated. That's why so many people can feel like they've been trying to discern their personal vocation for years and years, and may still feel like they don't know what they're not sure if they're in the right place, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. More importantly, I think most people still don't have a good sense of who they are. Okay, so who we are is distinct from what we do. A lot of times when we think about personal vocation, we are thinking about, well, what are we supposed to be doing? What is God calling me to do with my life, right? But doing is never the fundamental thing, right? Doing is always predicated on our being. And if we don't have a solid sense of who we are, and if we are not secure about the self that God created us to be, we will never be very effective at discerning what are we called to do. Okay, so we put the cart before the horse a lot of times, and when we do so without even realizing, right? So there's just so much. I was thinking about what I want to say to my clients, during the Saturday's webinar when we launched this process. And I just thought, that there's maybe something that I can share with those of you who are just following my content generally. I mean, you can benefit from this, I think, just by thinking about some of the points I will make. And today I can't make all the points either. It's just to kind of like, start putting stuff out there that may be helpful, right? So one thing I think is a very important presupposition that we don't think about when we talk about discerning personal vocation. So by presupposition, I mean, it's kind of like the very underlying principle, assumptions. We don't often talk about assumptions. We just want to know what we're supposed to do on the surface. So for example, if you think about it, what do people do when they try to discern their personal vocation or where God is calling them? People who don't usually go for retreats may decide they want to go for a retreat. They think that, a retreat or 2 or 3 might help them gain clarity about what God is calling them to do with their lives, right? Some people may do a bit more, go for a more extended approach and start spiritual direction, which is great, which is to, they want to learn how to hear God maybe better in their life. But the effectiveness of, let's say, vocation discernment retreats or any kind of personal retreat, and the effectiveness of individual spiritual direction even, no matter how good a spiritual director you might have, rests on 2 other things. And this is what I think a lot of people don't realize, okay? So the first is we need to be able to experience God accompanying us in this process, right? So personal vocation or calling, we discern this calling because we believe that God, whom we're in a relationship with, is calling us. But the posture of our heart when we go into discernment can make a very big difference. If we feel like God is a taskmaster, or a king, very distant, very powerful, whom we are afraid of offending if we get the discernment wrong, we're not going to be very interiorly free, right? Our our heart is, we're kind of like in a posture of fear and anxiety. Yes, the stakes are high if we are discerning our personal calling, but what are we so afraid of? What are we ultimately afraid of? Okay, maybe we're afraid that we will never be happy if we don't get the discernment right, but maybe sometimes subconsciously we are not confident that God's love for us is always absolute and complete and unconditional, no matter how much we screw up our lives, no matter how dense we may be in the process of discerning our personal vocation. And that will impede our ability to discern our personal vocation, right? And that's something that I've actually never really heard anyone talk about. People always talk about the very high level stuff, even like, the rules of discernment, all these things that we're supposed to know, how to pray, what the scripture tells us. But at the heart of all these things is the human person, is you, is me, who has to integrate these things and act on them, who is in relationship with God. And if that foundation is not solid, none of these other things are going to be very helpful, right? Okay, so first is we need to be able to experience God accompanying us. And this is a God who is attuned to us, a God whom we can trust, a God who is not in a hurry, not in a rush, so that in our own, sometimes, insecurity and anxiety, when we experience God accompanying us, we can slow down and we can be more at peace and we can rest in that love. If we cannot experience God accompanying us in this process of discerning our call, we can't even really be we can't even really say that we're discerning, because discernment is all about that relationship. Okay, so we need to be able to experience God accompanying us. And secondly, this is even less talked about. I've never actually heard anyone talk about this in the context of discernment of personal vocation. And that is, we need to be able to experience ourselves accompanying ourselves. Okay, we need to experience that I am with myself on this journey. I know how to accompany myself lovingly, patiently. I know how to encourage myself. I know how to lead myself. So in my relationship with God, I know how to, it's even less talk about, right? Because I think most people haven't even thought about relationship with yourself. I know I didn't. I never did, until quite late in my own journey with the Lord. And then I realized that not only did I not love myself, I didn't know how to accept myself. I didn't know even how to see myself. I basically had no relationship with myself, right? And as I grew in that relationship with myself, I realized how much of God's love came through to me through my relationship with myself. And then so many things clicked. And my own discernment of my personal vocation, this whole journey, it isn't just about figuring out what I'm called to do, but figuring out who I am finally, who God says I am. And to be able to be confident that this is who God says I am, and to be able to accept it, not just accept it, but celebrate it. That only came about when I learned how to build a relationship with myself, a healthy relationship with myself. And as it turns out, the process of discerning personal vocation can only really happen if we are in a secure relationship with ourselves. So our relationship with ourselves is kind of like seated within our relationship with God. God loves us very much through us loving ourselves. And this relationship is prior to any ability to love our neighbor. Right? So when we're very young, ideally, we've experienced unconditional love. Well, maybe not perfect, but close enough, right? Secure love from our caregivers. That will give us a sense of being securely held. That actually helps us to build our relationship with ourselves. But for many of us, the love that we received in our, in our growing up years, in our families and in the environments that we grow up, there's so much brokenness in that. We don't know how to be in a secure relationship with ourselves. And then when we get into young adulthood and we start asking these big existential questions like, what is God calling me to do with my life? We actually do not have the foundation to ask these questions. And we don't know, right? So we try and ask these questions, we try and find the tools to go about all these, figuring out what we're supposed to do. And all the while, most of us feel this hollowness still in our life that's telling us, I'm not quite there yet, I haven't quite figured it out, which is fine. We usually haven't figured anything fully out. But the tricky thing is that when we are secure in who we are, there is no haste. There is no anxiety that we haven't figured it out, because we experience God accompanying us and we experience ourselves accompanying ourselves. We know we are not abandoned. We know that our worth, our value, our belovedness does not lie on the condition of us figuring out what our personal vocation is. We know that the worth of our lives is not dependent on even our service or contribution to the kingdom of God. I mean, all that is great, but our worth and our lovableness, our belovedness is not predicated on the service that we can offer. But the sad reality is that most of us in our day-to-day living, in the messages that we are getting, right, not only out in the secular world, I would say, but very much even in the way we have experienced and interpreted even our religious upbringing, our spiritual lives, actually kind of tells us, your belovedness and your value is somehow still related to you being good, right? You not sinning, you figuring out what God is calling you to do. Just think about it. Explicitly, cognitively, we may think that's not true, right? And we may even know all the correct teachings. But our hearts and our bodies are telling us a different thing. Our hearts and our bodies, they are often in anxiety. They are often stressed and fearful. And that's telling us that big parts of us actually do not feel safe, even though our intellect tells us that we are safe with God. And that often talks about the culture that we are in. It may not be visible, and most of us, we are not aware of it. But once you begin to see it, you can't unsee it. Okay, once we begin to see how we're not safe, we can't unsee it. And then we learn how to build that safety into our own lives. Okay, so a while back, I did both a video and a post on this account, on my Animan Instagram account, about the 4 layers of self-knowledge. Right? And that's actually a very fundamental piece to this whole thing about discerning personal vocation. So people do talk about, knowing yourself, self-awareness, and then, but again, there isn't a deeper realization that there are different depths and layers to self-knowledge. And again, to discern personal vocation, we actually need the deeper levels or layers of self-knowledge, right? So if you can't remember what these 4 layers are, I will mention them briefly in this video, but, bears repeating. I hope you can go back and revisit the post and the video that I made specifically on the 4 layers of self-knowledge. So the 4 layers of self-knowledge are, the top layer is intellectual knowledge. What I know about myself, often through what other people reflect to me, or things like maybe, psychometric instruments tell me, right? So the source of the knowledge about myself kind of comes from outside of me, right? And these are important things, being able to see how other people see us, or other objective kind of like, let's say, instruments are able to reflect aspects of ourselves to us, right? But intellectual knowing is very surface knowing. It's certainly not enough. Not enough. No matter how many assessments you've taken or instruments you've taken to kind of tell you your psychological makeup, your personality, or even, I would go so far as to even say maybe aspects of spiritual journeying, direction, or retreats where you learn about your wounds. There is an element, those touch on different layers of the self-knowledge, but there's also an element where it's intellectual knowledge. You know when you're just still at just this outermost layer, when the knowledge of yourself is a little distant, feels a little distant. Yeah, it's like, I know this about myself, and so what? What does it mean? Right? That's intellectual knowing. Okay, like, what does it mean? The next layer of self-knowledge is what I call experiential knowledge. Now it's not just a cognitive thing. Now it's not just an intellectual thing. It is, I experience, I know this about myself because I've experienced it. So for example, I know I don't like crowded events, okay, of any kind, because whenever I go there, I feel really uncomfortable. This is an example, right? I feel really uncomfortable about about everything, about myself. I'm stressed. I'm anxious. I much prefer, let's say, smaller gatherings, lower noise levels. So I know about that. I know that about myself from experience. Okay, or I know I like fried chicken, for example, because I've tried it and I know I like it. So I know from experience. But even at this layer of experience, it's kind of like just touch and go, Okay, I know this about myself because I experienced it. But it doesn't go deeper to accompany myself, to be in relationship with myself. Like, and what are you feeling? What are you feeling about the discomfort when you're in a crowded event, right? I don't feel myself experiencing it. Okay, let me repeat. I don't feel myself experiencing an event. To be able to feel myself experiencing something is to bring the experiential knowledge another level deeper into my awareness, into me being able to accompany myself. And now we're talking about the third layer of self-knowledge, and I call it effective knowledge, effective knowing of myself. That's where I learn to attune to myself. I attune to how my body is feeling. I attune to what emotions are surfacing. These are such important data for me to be able to hear and listen. But more importantly, for my inner self to experience that I am cared for, that I am cared for by myself. So even before my higher cognitive functions can maybe figure out, have a sense of what my emotions mean or what signals my body may be saying to me, the more important thing is that I am with myself. I care enough about myself to stay, to feel with her, right? To feel with me, to listen to my emotions. You just think about it. If it was someone else, if this is not yourself, this was a good friend, someone that you care about, and if you can sense that this person maybe was feeling disturbed, you could, if you are attuned, right? If you're somebody who can be present, you would just come alongside this person and wait and let her feel whatever she feels, and maybe let her reflect to you what she's feeling without any judgment, right? Without even trying to understand what's going on, but just to be with her. That is such an important experience of being accompanied, of being loved. It does something to our brains. It does something in our nervous system to allow us to feel safe. And when we're feeling safe, we can be very present. And then it's like our awareness grows, our capacity to attend to new data, to hear God speak, to hear anyone, to be present to what's going on around us, just really, really expands when we feel safe. So being accompanied is such an important thing. And some of us, at least, I think we try to do that for someone that we care about. But we may not know how to do that for ourselves. Very often, we've learned to disassociate with even what's going on inside of us. And then we have a very pronounced, maybe, inner critic that may be very judgmental about what we're feeling. Like maybe if we're feeling a bit distressed, you may not even realize this, but maybe there's a dialogue going on in your head inside of you. Maybe there's a part of you that goes like, don't be such a wuss, be confident, be friendly, be sociable, be hospitable, So ignore that part of you that's feeling stressed at being, maybe in this very noisy or loud kind of event. Show up, just show up, right? I know that was my experience. And I think for a lot of people who, especially those who kind of learn to just push through, right? To accomplish things, to achieve things, that's probably the inner dialogue that we have. So what happens? Imagine if that was your friend and she's feeling distressed and you're not giving her any space, to share with you, even if it's not during the event, maybe afterwards, will you take time to let her share with you how she felt, how distressed she actually felt? Because that could help also, even if not in the moment, later on, you set aside an intentional time to be with that person. Do you do that for yourself? For most of us, we never do that for ourselves because we're just go, go, go. Like, what am I supposed to do? Let's do the next thing. We don't know how to be attuned to ourselves, which means we have no way, we don't know how to have that third layer of self-knowledge, effective knowledge of ourselves. Now, if we don't develop this muscle, you can forget about effectively discerning your personal vocation. Okay, because your own inner self, the deepest parts of yourself, do not feel safe with you. They will not feel safe with you to share their fears, their hopes, their dreams, because they may be too quickly shut up by yourself. Right? So that's why inner work, beyond the spiritual, the obvious kind of like spiritual work, is so important. Most of us, we don't know how to repair our relationship with ourselves. Right? Now, the fourth deepest level of self-knowledge is what I call unitive self-knowledge. This is really, we're going into the realm of integration. So not only have I learned to be attentive and present to what's going on inside of me, to let myself, my inner self and the different parts of myself feel cared for so that I actually feel safe with myself. I also now know how to lead myself into deeper integration, into becoming more whole, in response to God's leadership of me, in response to God's accompaniment of me. All right. So in the context in which I operate, which is always within the context of a deep, abiding, loving relationship with God who loves me, right? The relationship with self ultimately sits on and deepens and also interfaces with my relationship with God, right? And so if we are discerning personal vocation, you see, here's the thing. Even if we have ultimately a wonderful and beautiful call, that call probably can only be realized and lived into when I have matured, when I am more whole, when I'm integrated, when I am able to be morally courageous, when I dare to be myself unapologetically, when I'm able to withstand criticism, judgment. All those things may still hurt, but if I am sure of who I am, like Christ was, he was so sure of who he was, that no persecution and criticism and judgment and pushback could make him veer from him fulfilling his mission, his vocation, right? Because he is so anchored in who he is. And that's the invitation for you and me as well. If I am anchored deeply in who I am, then I can participate in God's work of redemption and integration with me. So the unitive dimension or the unitive layer of self-knowledge is really kind of like that last, maybe not last, but for our purposes, right? That last layer that needs to be happening for us to really discern our personal vocation. Okay, so I've said a lot already so far, and you realize I haven't even talked about instruments. I haven't even talked about methodology. I haven't talked about all these things, which are also important, but they need to rest on this foundation. They all need to rest on this foundation, right? Of deeper self-knowledge and also deeper knowledge of God. So in another post on my IG, and I don't think I made a video on that, but there's a post I did on that, I also talked about the 4 layers of knowing God. And it's the same 4 layers, but this is in relation to God, right? So we can know God intellectually, we can know God only experientially. I say only experientially because knowing God experientially, we're not yet attuned to him attuning to us. We do not yet know how to sustain and become attached to him. So just think about it. Some of us, or maybe more of us now, have had God experiences, right? We say God experiences. Are they important? Of course, they're very important. But if those experiences only last as they do, and we don't know how to let that grow into a sustained attachment with God, then we don't yet have the ability to have the third layer of effective knowledge with God, we won't be able to experience God accompanying us, right? And ultimately, if we can't experience God accompanying us, then we won't be able to really let Him integrate us and make us whole and heal us, because that comes at a cost as well. Okay, it's not easy. All this healing work and integrating work, they're not easy. They only are possible when we have the kind of support, first within ourselves and with God, and then of course from other people. But you see, we often talk about the need of help, the need of support, our need of support from other people as well, but we don't understand how that links to what's happening inside of us, right? So that's why the title of this live is What You Don't Know About Discerning Personal Vocation. I hope you learned something new. I think I'm just going to stop here for this particular live. There are so many other points that, there's so many other dimensions to this, but I'll try and continue on, in another live. But I hope that this has helped you. And if you have any questions, please, leave a comment or send me a direct message, and that might give me a sense also of maybe what to highlight or what to respond to the next time I do a live or in one of my other videos. So thanks to those of you who dropped in while I was on this live. I just want to say I'm not able to really acknowledge as people come in because I get distracted very easily and I will lose my train of thought. Okay, so hope this has been helpful, and I wish you a wonderful day.